All right. Welcome in, everyone. You know why you're here, reader. It's the deep dive.
It is, and I think it's safe to say our listeners, they're a discerning bunch.
They are. They're the learners. They want the core, the meat of things.
Absolutely.
Fast, no time for the fluff.
Oh,
and
no.
we get that, so that's what we aim for.
Efficient.
Right, that's it. Efficient understanding, getting you informed. So
And today,
we've got, let's lay it out. Basic economics.
Basic economics, yeah. We're using Thomas Sowell's Basic Economic.
We are. Got some excerpts here ready to really pull out.
To distill, really. Distill these principles.
These principles, yeah, that
are always in play. I mean,
okay, right.
People may be a master in their own field.
Engineering, science, the arts, anything.
Absolutely.
But this stuff,
yeah,
this is like the underlying current, the logic, really, for how things work. And I will say, even for folks who are super expert in their field.
Yes.
Their economics, sometimes it's kind of...
It's shaky.
Shaky, yeah. A little surprising. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So it starts right out with scarcity.
It does, yeah, which is the fundamental reality.
Bedrock.
It's the bedrock of economics. I mean...
kind of all know what that means, right? There's not enough for everyone. Yeah. Simple as that.
Right, not enough resources for all the wants. But Sewell hits on this really interesting point, I think it was, with this anecdote about middle-class Americans feeling strapped.
Oh, yeah.
Despite a 50% real income increase.
In your generation.
In one generation, yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, when you
compare that global perspective.
Yeah, to the global perspective.
Billions of others, yeah.
That same level, modest gains here.
Huge leap, yeah.
Would be a huge leap for other folks. So it really is a relative thing, isn't it?
It is. And that desire to always want more, right? I mean, that's human nature. So quotes someone in the book, just as soon as people make enough to live comfortably, they want to live extravagantly.
That's it. It's always a moving goalpost.
And so even someone with millions, if they're looking at a billionaire...
I'm feeling the constraint.
They are. So scarcity isn't just a poverty thing, is it?
No, it's a fundamental condition for everyone.
It is, and Sowell ties this right back to productive efforts, personal responsibility, thinking about spending.
Yes, yeah.
The credit card debt example, just hits home.
It does, and even after people dig themselves out...
Right.
That awareness...
It sticks with you.
It does. It sticks with you.
Yeah.
So it's not just economic theory. It's personal.
It is. It's every day. Yeah. And it's not just, modern times.
No.
So Maul makes the point, this is throughout history. This has always been the case.
Just a constraint, yeah.
The constraint that drives...
That drives all economic activity.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to prices.
Prices, yes, which are absolutely central. I mean, if we've got these scarce resources... Right. They can be used in all sorts of ways.
Infinite ways.
Yeah. So how do we actually decide where they go? That's where prices come in. And as Sowell explains, they act as signals, they're incentives, they're guides, really. They're how those resources get allocated to where they're most valued.
Like a silent language, kind of.
Absolutely.
Like the economy's talking to itself.
It is.
So let's take, again, milk. Okay, simple example.
Okay.
Milk can be cheese, ice cream, yogurt.
Butter.
So many things. So how does a farmer or, a processing plant decide how much to allocate?
Well, here's what's fascinating. That demand, that price sensitivity in one market.
Ripples through.
It ripples through the whole system. So let's say...
Say ice cream.
Ice cream, right. People aren't that...
Not going to cut back.
They're not that sensitive to the price. Okay. But yogurt, they're very price sensitive. So now, if there's a greater demand for cheese, which also uses milk, driving up the price, well, that's going to hit those yogurt producers harder.
Yeah.
They're going to have to pay more for that milk. So it's a constant balancing act. It all comes back to what people are willing to pay.
So it's all interconnected through this pricing mechanism, right?
It is.
One producer willing to pay, say, for milk.
Yeah.
That sets a benchmark that others got to contend with.
They do.
Yeah.
And that's how resources, according to Sowell, flow to the most valued use. It's like people are voting.
They are. They're voting with their wallets.
Right, their wallets, saying this is what we want more of.
And this is what we're willing to pay more for. And this is how you avoid those truly absurd situations.
Right.
Like Sowell talks about, the Soviet economy, right?
Yeah.
Warehouses full of stuff nobody wants, but you can't find the basics.
It's like trying to navigate in the dark.
It is. It is. You need those price signals,
Yeah.
otherwise you're
Yeah.
just flying blind. Flying blind.
Yeah.
So what happens when we try to mess with those natural price signals?
Yeah, this is where,
I mean, so Will goes into, what are the consequences of price controls?
right, both ceilings and floors.
Ceilings, floors, yeah. So let's start with ceilings.
Okay, so those are the government-imposed maximums.
Right. Maximum price.
And the crucial thing to grasp is that when you set a ceiling below where the market would naturally put it, it doesn't necessarily mean there's less of the thing itself. So Wells' example of the housing shortage after World War II in the U.S., that's a perfect illustration.
Yeah, so you had the population had grown, housing supply had increased,
Right.
but people still couldn't find places.
Right, so it's like this different type of scarcity.
So it wasn't the number of houses then. What was it?
It was those artificially low prices driven by rent control,
Rent control, yeah.
which is a type of price ceiling. And that actually increased demand.
Increase the demand, okay.
Because think about it now, young adults who might have stayed with their parents, or elderly folks, widows who might have lived with family,
Yeah.
they could now afford their own places. Existing renters, they wanted bigger apartments
Yeah.
because the price was kept down. So you had more people wanting more housing at these lower prices, and that's what created the shortage. It wasn't necessarily that there were fewer units per person.
So when those controls were eased or removed,
The shortages tended to disappear.
makes sense.
Yeah, because if rents could rise to market levels, some folks might choose to downsize.
Right, or stay with family a bit longer.
Yeah, freeing up those units. And the other thing, rent control, it hits the supply side too.
The supply side, okay.
So someone gets some pretty interesting examples. Melbourne, Australia,
Oh, yeah.
after rent control, basically no new apartment buildings for 9 years.
Wow. 9 years.
Yeah, it wasn't profitable.
Right.
And you see similar patterns elsewhere, like Santa Monica, California, decline in building permits.
Mhm.
San Francisco, aging housing stock. Even in Sweden, where housing units per person actually went up over decades, average waiting time for an apartment also went up.
So the very policy designed to make things more affordable
Right.
can lead to less being available.
It's a classic case.
Classic unintended consequence.
It is.
Okay, so what about price floors?
Price floors, so that's the other side,
Yeah.
where the government sets a minimum price.
Above the market.
Above what the market would set, yeah.
Got it.
And so Wells' example here, agricultural price supports during the Depression.
So that was trying to keep those farm prices
From plummeting.
from totally bottoming out, yeah.
Right.
And that led to, I'm guessing, the opposite problem.
It did, a surplus.
A surplus, yeah.
Because when you guarantee a price higher than the market will bear,
Right,
you encourage overproduction,
right.
you discourage consumption. And so you end up with this glut. And so details some of the further interventions, right? Like limits on how much you could grow. Peanuts, cotton,
Wow.
local cartels, citrus fruit, nuts.
I did not know that.
Yeah, with penalties if you went over your quota. So, I mean, these were meant to help farmers, right?
Right.
During tough times.
Well,
But they distorted the market.
they did.
And often it was the larger producers who benefited most.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating, but also a little bit frustrating
It
to
is.
see how these good intentions
Right.
can backfire.
When you don't understand these
Very much.
fundamental forces.
Yeah. Which takes us to Sell's point about understanding causation.
Yes. The difference between systemic interactions
Yeah.
and intentional actions. And this, I think, is key.
This is huge.
Yeah, for anyone trying to grasp how the economy works. Because Sewell is pointing out our human tendency, is to attribute things to motives.
The motives, yeah, to someone's intention. Greed, that's the catch-all, right?
Right.
Rather than seeing those systemic forces, supply, demand.
Competition.
Yeah, the incentive. It's like he makes the analogy to early humans, right? They
Right.
blame spirits
Right.
for the wind, the rain.
Instead of understanding the weather, yeah.
Exactly.
So if prices go up, we say,
Right.
oh, businesses are being greedy,
They're gouging us.
when maybe it's actually a decrease in supply.
Or an increase in demand.
Or some combination of the two, yeah.
Exactly.
And this misunderstanding can lead to those policies
To those very policies, yeah.
that we were just talking about,
That backfire.
that backfire. So
Uh-huh.
Panner mentions press controls in low-income areas,
Right,
interest rate ceilings, and it's meant to prevent exploitation.
right.
but it can actually reduce the supply.
It does. Goods, credit, it dries up.
And then people might turn to, loan sharks,
Right.
more predatory options.
Yeah, because those higher costs of doing business in those areas, they're often systemic.
Right.
Higher insurance costs, things like that.
Not necessarily malice.
Exactly.
I love that example Sowell gives about the Soviet Union, the mining equipment.
Oh, yes.
Painted the wrong color.
Painted the wrong color. Yeah, so it was unusable.
So it's technically there, but
Yeah.
not the way it needed to be.
And it highlights how these rigid non-price signals and just a lack of responsiveness to real needs
Right.
can create these inefficiencies, these shortages, even when the stuff is there.
Right.
It's not that the factory manager was intentionally trying to sabotage things.
Right.
He was just responding to a flawed system.
To the system.
Top-down instructions instead of feedback. And so it was very clear.
Yeah.
These negative consequences, they're not just theoretical. I mean, there's a ton of empirical evidence. He's got that famous quote, I think it was from a Swedish socialist, "Rent control is the most efficient way to destroy a city."
Except for bombing.
Except for bombing, yeah.
And that's coming from
From a socialist.
Yeah, pretty powerful.
It is.
And then that anecdote from the Vietnamese communist official
Oh, yes. Yeah.
who saw how those very low rents in Hanoi actually led to the city's deterioration, even where American bombing had failed.
Yeah, it's really striking.
It is. And it suggests, these principles,
They have universal relevance.
regardless of political systems, yeah.
Yeah. And he uses that example of Russia, vast natural resources,
Right.
struggling to feed their people because they didn't allow a free market
They didn't?
in food to function.
Wow.
Local officials would restrict the movement of food
Oh, wow.
to keep prices low within their regions.
Right.
Local political gain,
Right.
maybe not stupid locally,
Right.
but the cumulative effect,
Disastrous.
disastrous.
So it really drives home that point that free markets,
Yeah.
prices are crucial.
They're the allocation mechanism.
Yeah. Not just some ideal.
No.
It's about things getting where they need to go.
It is.
And then we start talking about national priorities.
Yes.
And so Ballin makes this distinction between incremental trade-offs
Yes.
versus these categorical
Rigid priorities.
priorities. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we say this is more important than that,
Right.
we miss the reality that the value we place on things, it changes.
It changes depending on how much we already have.
Right. Those examples, salt, fat, cholesterol.
Alcohol,
Right. Like nothing is,
inherently good or bad.
it's all about
It's about quantity.
quantity. Yeah.
Context.
Context. So making those incremental trade-offs, that's what tends to lead to better outcomes
It does.
than those rigid priorities.
Because you're ignoring the nuance, the individual preferences.
Right.
The changing realities.
Yeah.
And then Well brings in subsidies.
Cities, yeah.
And taxes.
Taxes.
Right. Because in that ideal world, prices should allow people to compete for those resources based on what they're willing to pay.
Right.
But when governments step in,
Distorts it.
it distorts the whole thing.
Yeah.
So the prices, they no longer reflect those true costs,
Right.
the scarcity.
And then we get those inefficiencies.
Yeah, unintended consequences.
That California water crisis example.
No, it's perfect.
So stark.
Yeah, heavily subsidized water for farmers.
In a desert,
In
essentially.
a desert, yeah.
So they're growing rice, cotton, things that just
Wouldn't be economically viable.
without those subsidies.
Exactly.
So Sewell makes this point that those free market prices,
They're like thermometer readings.
thermometer reading.
They're giving us that vital information.
Right.
Trying to manipulate them, it's like sticking the thermometer in ice water
Right. To get a lower.
to get a lower reading.
But it doesn't change the actual
The underlying condition.
condition. Yeah.
And it can make things worse.
It can. Which takes us to this dynamic nature of a price-coordinated economy.
Yes, it's not static, it's constantly.
Changing,
Yeah.
evolving.
Yeah.
Evolving, yeah.
And that story about A&P, the grocery store chain, is fascinating.
It is, yeah. I mean, they were
huge, they were efficient, they were offering lower prices.
yeah, but they got complacent.
They did.
And then new competitors
Came along.
with even better models, lower prices, and that was it.
So the real winner in all of this is the consumer.
It is, yeah. Lower prices, more efficiency, more variety.
The individual company, it's important,
Right.
but it's not the ultimate measure. Got sex right. So profits, crucial incentives, losses, signals,
Right, to adapt, to change, or go away.
or go away. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then knowledge and insight, those become like the scarce resource, right?
They do, they do. The entrepreneurs, the businesses who really understand
Yeah.
what's happening,
The trends.
the unmet needs, they find those efficiencies.
Yeah, like JCPenney and later Sam Walton, Walmart.
Right.
Those key insights.
And it's about the success of those insights, not just the survival of the company.
Right, right. It's that pressure
Constant adaptation.
that drives that higher standard of living. And Sowell makes a great point, he says. Societies that limit decision-making.
To a small group.
Right, centralized.
It wastes all that knowledge.
That's out there, yeah. Dispersed among the people.
And so a free market
Yeah.
allows that.
Decentralized application of that knowledge.
It's such a great contrast to that Soviet system,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Centralized decision-making.
which is the opposite.
It's the opposite, yeah.
And they didn't have those price signals.
Yeah.
They didn't have the profit loss.
The incentives.
The incentives. So you get all this stuff produced.
that nobody wants.
Yeah.
And you can't find the stuff you need.
Right. They didn't have that feedback mechanism
No.
to adapt.
Right.
It's kind of like that gasoline shortage example,
Oh, yeah. In the U.S. in the 70s.
which is
A
obviously
much smaller scale.
much smaller, yeah.
But still, it gives you a glimpse
Or glimpse, yeah,
into the problems
of that allocation.
of centralized allocation. Yeah. And it was temporary for the U.S., but
But that was everyday life.
in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, yeah.
Because in a price-coordinated economy,
Yeah,
those decisions, what to produce, how much, where it goes,
right.
it's guided by that collective knowledge
Have everybody, yeah.
of countless individuals. And in a centrally planned one, it's a small group.
It's dictated.
Yeah. And they just don't have that knowledge.
And that has huge implications.
Huge implications.
It does, yeah. And then there's profit.
Profit, which is so often misunderstood. I mean,
Yeah.
Sowell really clarifies it's not some guaranteed windfall.
Right.
It's contingent on efficiency.
Meeting demand.
Yeah, meeting demand at a price people will pay. And the threat of loss, that's crucial too.
The threat of loss, okay.
Yeah, for the whole system to work. It's not just about the rate of profit.
Which people often overestimate.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
But it's about the role of profit, that incentive.
That incentive
And there's difference between profit on sales and profit on investment.
on investment, okay.
Yeah, so that prospect of earning a profit, that's a primary driver
Or driver, yeah.
of efficiency, of innovation, and allocating resources effectively.
Yeah. So it talks about the limits to firm size in certain industries, right?
There is, yeah.
Things like restaurants.
Yeah, where you need that personal knowledge.
That on-site monitoring,
Monitoring, yeah.
customized service,
They can't scale up.
like a manufacturing plant.
Right, right.
And franchising, he points out, that's often a way
To try and...
to align those incentives,
Right.
to maintain quality,
Mm-hmm.
and then efficiency itself.
Yeah.
It's not some absolute thing. It's relative to the circumstances.
It is. It is. What's efficient in a rich country?
With abundant capital.
High labor costs.
Might be completely different
Yeah.
in a poor country.
Where it's the opposite. Where it's flipped, yeah.
Yeah.
So things like farming techniques, the number of middlemen, that all varies depending on those economic realities.
The interdependence of production. I mean, that's another
Key, yeah.
key point, right? So
Mm.
you got General Motors
Yeah.
relies on all these tire companies and all these other suppliers
Yeah.
because the risk of them not delivering
Is so high.
is so high.
Yeah.
And so that leads to this greater efficiency.
Right, compared to trying to do everything yourself,
Right.
which you often saw in centrally planned systems.
Right. Right. Okay, so then we get to monopoly
Monopoly, yeah.
and the harm that can cause.
And the key here is that by being the sole provider,
Right.
they face limited competition.
Right.
So they can charge those higher prices.
Then in a competitive market.
Yeah. And it forces consumers to forego using those scarce resources in ways they might value more.
Yeah. Leading
Into
to
overall inefficiency. Less wealth created. And it's not necessarily that the monopolist is intentionally restricting output. It's more that those higher prices...
cause people to buy less,
Yeah.
which then leads to less
Production.
production. Okay.
Yeah. And then you've got government regulation of monopolies.
Which is tricky.
It's incredibly complex.
They might not be as bad as we think
Yeah, because they still face that threat.
of substitution.
The substitution, yeah.
So Alcoa, aluminum,
Yeah.
eventually, steel, plastic come along.
Yeah.
And so Alcoa also criticizes how markets are defined.
Right, in those antitrust cases.
In those cases, yeah, they can inflate a company's
Market share. Leading to interventions
that might not be
necessary.
necessary. Yeah.
And all of this highlights the importance of entrepreneurial insight, and taking risks.
Yeah.
I mean, different understandings of those market conditions,
Right.
consumer preferences.
Yeah.
That's what drives success and failure.
Yeah. Sears, Safeway, they adapted to the suburbs.
Right.
Montgomery Ward, A&P did.
And didn't as well.
And so they faded.
And that constant competition, it drives innovation.
It does.
It lowers prices.
And less efficient methods, they
They get displaced.
get displaced. Yeah. And maybe one of the biggest dangers of government is what Sowell calls the foreclosure of knowledge.
It's a great term, yeah.
Governments make decisions based on less information.
Than is out there in society.
Right. And once it becomes law,
Right.
it doesn't matter.
If it's valid anymore.
Right. Power trumps truth.
Which, the Soviet Union's a perfect example.
It is.
And so we'll contrast those market incentives, the profit, the threat of loss,
Right.
which drive efficiency.
In free market competition,
Yeah, with those socialist systems.
where the elimination of profit, while it might sound good,
It can also remove the pressure
the pressure to keep costs down,
to innovate, to serve the consumer,
leading to
a
potentially,
lower standard of living.
even though
There's no profit.
no profit, right? And then the idea of quality
Yeah,
in a market economy, it's not some objective thing
it's not. It's defined by what the consumers want.
and what they're willing to pay for
Yeah. So mass-produced goods, they can ensure a certain level.
of quality, reliability. Yeah.
Yeah. And pricier options, well, they cater to different demands.
Right. Higher performance, maybe?
Yeah, durability, specialized features.
And the personal element.
Oh, yeah, that can't be overlooked.
Yeah.
Customer service, reputation, even just courtesy
Courtesy.
can be crucial.
Yeah.
He gives examples like F.W. Woolworth,
Oh, yeah.
emphasizing courteous service.
Right.
Ray Kroc with McDonald's, cleanliness, consistency.
It's about the details.
It is.
It is. And so talks about productivity differences.
Between countries, yeah.
So like American plants in Britain.
Yeah.
Often more productive than British plants.
Right.
And it's not necessarily the workers themselves.
Right. It's often management practices,
And practices, yeah.
how things are organized, technology. And then you've got the issue of comparing,
Groups.
different groups.
Discrimination.
Yeah, a thorny issue.
And so Goel points out it's hard to draw accurate conclusions.
From just simple statistical comparison.
Comparisons, yeah.
Because you've got things like work histories,
Education.
choices, trade-offs. I mean, women taking time out for family.
Right.
That all impacts income. So it's not always a straightforward comparison.
Right.
And he makes the point that in a free market, discrimination by employers based on things unrelated to productivity, post speaker.